The courtroom buzzed with low whispers as Emily Carter stood before Judge George Hawkins. The room, packed with lawyers, reporters, and spectators, felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. She was only 30 years old, but the tension in the air made her feel decades older. The murmurs from the gallery intensified as Judge Hawkins, a man known for his strict no-nonsense demeanor, leaned back in his chair. His robes draped over his large frame like a heavy blanket, making him look imposing. Through his glasses, his eyes narrowed as he scanned Emily. "Miss Carter," the judge began, his voice dripping with skepticism, "do you understand what you're being accused of? This is a serious matter." Emily's heart raced, but her expression remained calm. She met his gaze directly, never wavering. "Yes, Your Honor, I understand." A few chuckles rippled through the room, mostly from the older men in suits who couldn't fathom the idea of a young woman like Emily standing up for herself. The judge's lips curled into a slight smirk. "This isn't some school debate club, young lady. You're in a courtroom." His voice dripped with condescension, as if dismissing her from the start. Emily didn't flinch. Instead, she straightened up. "I'm aware, Your Honor," she replied, her voice steady. "But I'm here to prove that this case has more holes than the defense you've built." A few gasps echoed in the room. The judge's smirk faded, replaced by a flash of irritation. "You think you can handle this?" he asked, his voice sharper. "I know I can," Emily said, her confidence now filling the room. The gallery fell silent, everyone waiting for her next move. The room was thick with tension as the prosecutor, Daniel West, paced before the bench, a confident smirk on his face. He had rehearsed his lines, knowing this case would be a slam dunk. Emily Carter, standing at the defendant's table, was the last person he believed could challenge him, much less have the ability to defend herself. "Your Honor," West began, his voice smooth and practiced, "the evidence is clear. The defendant was found at the scene, and we have proof linking her to the crime." His fingers tapped the documents in his hands with a practiced rhythm, as if the case was already closed. Emily didn't flinch. Her gaze was steady, focused on the prosecutor, who was now looking down at her with what he thought was an air of superiority. She knew better. "Objection, Your Honor." Emily's voice cut through the room like a sharp blade, clear and unwavering. The judge, who had been nodding off slightly, looked up, startled. "Objection?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Do you even know what that means, Miss Carter?" Emily didn't waver. "Yes, Your Honor," she said calmly, meeting his gaze. "The prosecution is making assumptions based on circumstantial evidence. It's speculative and inadmissible." The murmurs from the gallery grew louder, a ripple of disbelief passing through the room. The prosecutor, momentarily stunned, quickly regained his composure. He turned to the judge, a sarcastic smile on his face. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We're wasting time." "You are," Emily interrupted, her voice sharp now, each word deliberate. "What's irregular is the lack of solid evidence and the improper handling of what you do have." She raised an eyebrow as she slowly turned her attention back to the judge. "If we're going to proceed on assumptions, then I'll file a motion to dismiss on the grounds of judicial bias." The room fell into stunned silence. No one had expected this, least of all Judge Hawkins, who had seen it all over his decades on the bench. He sat back, momentarily stunned by her boldness. "Motion for recusal?" he muttered, as if testing the weight of the words on his tongue. "You think you can make demands in my courtroom?" Emily's gaze was calm, unflinching. "I'm not making demands, Your Honor. I'm asserting my right to a fair trial. If you're not willing to hear my objections, then I'll request someone who will." West opened his mouth to protest, but the judge held up a hand, silencing him. "This is unprecedented," Judge Hawkins said slowly, his skepticism giving way to a new awareness. "Approach the bench, Miss Carter." The gallery watched in hushed silence as Emily walked toward the bench, her sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. Every eye in the room was on her, but Emily walked like she didn't feel their judgment. She stood tall, placing a stack of papers in front of the judge. "I've done the prosecution's job for them, Your Honor," Emily said, her voice steady. "These are the documents proving the inconsistencies in their case." Judge Hawkins picked up the papers, his fingers skimming over the pages. His frown deepened as he read, his brow furrowing. He glanced up at Emily, confusion in his eyes. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice edged with disbelief. "I prepared it," Emily replied simply. "I may not look like the lawyer you expected, but I am one." The room was stunned into silence. West, who had been practically salivating at the idea of winning this case with minimal effort, now stood frozen. He didn't know how to respond. "You prepared this?" Hawkins muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "How?" Emily hesitated for a moment, then offered the simplest answer she could. "I read, Your Honor. I read everything I could to understand the law." The courtroom buzzed with whispers, and even the judge's hardened exterior cracked slightly. This wasn't some frightened teenager standing trial. Emily Carter was a force to be reckoned with. The entire courtroom was on edge, the weight of Emily's revelation hanging in the air. The prosecutor, Daniel West, stood frozen, his jaw clenched tightly as he tried to process what had just been said. Emily Carter wasn't just some minor standing trial, she was a licensed attorney. The gallery, once skeptical, was now leaning forward, eager to hear what would come next. Even the judge, usually unmoved by anything, was staring at her with a mix of confusion and curiosity. "Ms. Carter," Judge Hawkins said slowly, his voice now softer, though still tinged with disbelief, "you're telling me you passed the bar exam? At your age?" Emily nodded once, her expression calm and collected. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm a licensed attorney in the state of California." A murmur spread through the room. Some of the older lawyers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while the spectators exchanged incredulous looks. This was a bombshell, one that no one had seen coming. "How?" West blurted out, his voice tight with frustration. "How does a 30-year-old woman—" He hesitated, realizing his mistake, but he pressed on. "Someone like you become an attorney? This doesn't make any sense." Emily's eyes met his without a flicker of doubt. "I studied, Mr. West," she said, her voice firm. "I earned my degree, passed the bar exam, and now I'm here to make sure justice is served. Unlike you, I don't assume things will go my way just because I'm standing in this courtroom." The courtroom fell silent again. The judge, who had once looked down on her as just another defendant, now regarded her with a new respect. He leaned forward, looking at the paperwork she had given him, scanning through the reports she had so confidently presented. "These documents," Judge Hawkins muttered, his voice almost to himself, "they're accurate. They're thorough." He looked up, his eyes narrowing as he locked gazes with Emily. "Where did you learn to do this?" Emily's lips curved into a faint smile, but her answer was direct. "I taught myself, Your Honor. I knew the stakes were high, and I wasn't going to let someone else fight my battle for me. I wasn't just going to be a statistic. I chose to fight back." West sneered, unable to hide his irritation. "This is absurd. A child playing lawyer in my courtroom." "This is not a game," Emily interrupted, her voice unwavering. "This is about justice, something you seem to have forgotten." She turned to the judge, her tone softer now, but no less intense. "You have to see this for what it is, Your Honor. This case is built on assumptions and speculation, not solid evidence. If you look closer, you'll see the truth." The judge, who had once thought of Emily as nothing more than a young woman caught in a legal mess, was now reassessing the situation. He glanced at the documents in front of him, flipping through them with a careful eye. For the first time since the trial had begun, he seemed unsure of himself. "Mr. West," Judge Hawkins said, his voice finally gaining authority again, "I think it's time we take a deeper look at the evidence. You've made some serious claims, but I'm not sure you've proven your case." Emily's gaze never left the judge's face. "I don't just want you to dismiss the case, Your Honor," she said quietly. "I want you to see the truth. For everyone here." The room held its breath as the judge flipped through page after page, his face slowly changing from skepticism to surprise, and then to something resembling respect. The prosecution's case, once so solid, was crumbling before their eyes. Emily Carter wasn't the helpless teenager they had thought she was. She was a formidable force, and now, the whole courtroom knew it. The air in the courtroom grew thick with tension as Emily Carter's quiet confidence continued to unravel the prosecutor's case. As Judge Hawkins flipped through the documents she'd handed him, his expression shifted from disbelief to a deepening frustration. The once assertive prosecutor, Daniel West, now stood with his back straight, his face flushed with anger. This was not how he had envisioned the day going. He had expected an easy win, not this challenge to his authority. "Your Honor," Emily began, her voice cutting through the stillness of the room, "let's talk about Exhibit B, the so-called surveillance footage." She gestured toward the screen where the grainy video had been shown earlier. "It shows someone who looks like me near the scene of the crime, but what you failed to mention, intentionally or not, is that the timestamp is missing." West's face darkened. He shot up from his chair, eyes narrowing. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous," he snapped. "We all know that timestamp issues can be fixed in editing. It doesn't change the fact that the footage shows the defendant at the scene." Emily met his glare, undeterred. "If the evidence has been tampered with, Mr. West, then it's inadmissible. You can't just fix mistakes when it suits you." She turned back to the judge, her gaze steady. "This video was retrieved from an unverified source, and the chain of custody was never properly documented. Without authentication, it's meaningless." The room held its breath. The prosecutor opened his mouth to argue, but Emily was already ahead of him. "I also have a forensic analyst report right here," she said, calmly sliding another set of papers across the bench. "This report details all the inconsistencies in the video file. If you'll read it, Your Honor, you'll see that this footage is nothing but a sham." Judge Hawkins, who had previously dismissed her with condescension, now sat forward, scanning the report with increasing intensity. His brow furrowed as he examined the details. He glanced at West, who was now visibly sweating, trying to find a way to recover. "Mr. West," Judge Hawkins began slowly, his voice measured. "Is this true? Is the video evidence compromised?" He turned to Emily, his expression now one of begrudging respect. "Do you have any other concerns with the prosecution's evidence?" Emily didn't hesitate. "Yes, Your Honor, I do. Let's move on to Exhibit D, the so-called confession." She paused, allowing her words to hang in the air. The gallery leaned in, sensing the shift in the room. "This confession was signed after hours of intense interrogation. I was never offered legal representation, which is a violation of my rights under federal law." West, who had been trying to regain his composure, sputtered, "That's not relevant. The confession is valid. It was made voluntarily." Emily raised a hand, silencing him. "Not without counsel, Mr. West. And even if we were to entertain the confession, you'll find discrepancies in it. For example, the address listed in the statement is wrong. I've never lived there. That's public record." She turned back to the judge, her voice unwavering. "This confession is invalid, and it should be thrown out." Judge Hawkins's face reddened as he processed this new information. He shot a look at West, who was now shifting uncomfortably, his earlier confidence completely gone. "Mr. West," the judge said, his tone laced with authority, "do you have any explanation for this?" West opened and closed his mouth, but no words came. He fumbled with his papers, but they offered no salvation. The courtroom was silent, each person holding their breath, watching the unraveling of the case before them. Emily didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just stood there, waiting for the judge to process the implications of what she had just revealed. She wasn't just a defendant anymore. She was the one in control of the courtroom, and it was clear to everyone that she wasn't going down without a fight. Judge Hawkins looked at Emily, his expression now unreadable. "I think we've seen enough," he said quietly but with finality. The prosecutor's case had crumbled, and with it, West's confidence. The room was still, but the tension was palpable. Emily had turned the tables, and now all eyes were on the judge. Would he rule in her favor? The tension in the courtroom had reached a breaking point. The prosecution's case, once so airtight, was now unraveling at an alarming rate. Emily Carter, with quiet determination, had systematically exposed the flaws in every piece of evidence. The room, once filled with whispers of disbelief, had turned into a charged silence. Everyone, lawyers, spectators, Even the judge himself watched as the young woman standing before them slowly dismantled the case that had seemed so certain only hours before. Judge Hawkins, his face pale, sat back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He looked down at the papers on his desk, flipping through them again as if searching for a mistake that would allow him to dismiss Emily's arguments. But there were none. The evidence she had presented was sound, meticulous even. His earlier condescension had faded, replaced by a deep-seated realization. He had underestimated her, and it was becoming painfully clear. "Mr. West," Judge Hawkins said finally, his voice tinged with disbelief, "how do you explain this? The evidence is compromised, and it's clear the confession was obtained illegally." West, who had been standing with his arms crossed in defiance, finally broke his silence. His face was flushed, his jaw clenched with frustration. "Your Honor, this is absurd. You can't just throw out all the evidence because of a few inconsistencies. She's just playing games with you." He shot a glance at Emily, as if trying to shake her confidence. "She doesn't belong here." Emily's gaze never wavered. "I belong here more than you think, Mr. West. The truth belongs here, too," she said calmly. Her words, though measured, were sharp as ever, striking at the heart of the prosecution's case. "You wanted an easy win, but you didn't bother to do your job. You didn't check your evidence. You didn't follow the law. And now it's all falling apart." The judge's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward, his voice growing firmer. "Enough, Mr. West," he snapped. "I will not tolerate this in my courtroom." His words echoed through the room, and for the first time since the trial had begun, the prosecutor seemed to shrink under the judge's gaze. "You've failed to prove your case. And frankly, I don't like the way you've handled this." The gallery watched in stunned silence, the weight of the judge's words sinking in. This wasn't just a setback for the prosecution, it was a complete reversal. Emily had not only proven the case against her was weak, but she had also exposed a deeper truth. How easily the system could be manipulated when those in charge were too quick to judge. West's face turned bright red, but he held his tongue. The fight had gone out of him. Emily turned back to the judge, her posture still as calm and composed as ever. Judge Hawkins cleared his throat, his voice softening but no less serious. "Ms. Carter," he began, "I must admit I misjudged you. I assumed you were just another teenager caught up in a mess too big for her. But you've shown me that I was wrong." Emily didn't smile or gloat. She simply nodded in acknowledgement. She wasn't here for validation. She was here for justice. The judge's hands were shaking slightly as he reached for his gavel. "Based on the lack of credible evidence and the significant violations in procedure, I have no choice but to dismiss the case against you." The room erupted. Some in the gallery let out gasps of disbelief. Others, particularly those who had been silently rooting for Emily, nodded in approval. The prosecutor sat down in defeat, his face a mask of humiliation. As the judge banged his gavel, declaring the case closed, Emily gathered her papers with quiet dignity. She turned and began to walk toward the door. The courtroom doors opened, and she stepped out into the hallway, where the weight of the world seemed to lift off her shoulders. The reporter waiting outside rushed up to her, microphone in hand. "Ms. Carter," the reporter asked, almost breathless, "how did you manage to turn this around? What was your secret?" Emily stopped, her expression calm but resolute. She looked directly into the camera. "There's no secret," she said. "The law is supposed to serve everyone, not just those who fit a certain mold. I'm here to prove that anyone, no matter their age, background, or appearance, can fight for justice." She paused, then added, "It's not about winning. It's about making sure the truth comes out." As she walked away from the camera, heads turned and whispers filled the air. Some people saw her as an unlikely hero, while others couldn't believe the outcome. But Emily knew the truth. She had just made history, and she wouldn't be underestimated again. As the judge's final words echoed through the courtroom, the weight of victory pressed down on Emily Carter's shoulders. She had done it. She had stood alone, armed only with her knowledge of the law and an unwavering belief in justice, and she had won. The gallery was in uproar, some people applauding, others fuming in disbelief. But Emily, calm as ever, remained composed as she stood in the center of the courtroom, watching the scene unfold around her. Judge Hawkins, now visibly shaken but still authoritative, banged his gavel once more to restore order. "This court is adjourned," he declared, his voice steady but tinged with a newfound respect. His eyes flicked toward Emily, and for a moment their gazes locked. There was no smugness now, no condescension, only acknowledgement of what she had accomplished. As Emily gathered her papers and turned to leave, the room seemed to part before her. People stepped aside, watching her with a mixture of awe, confusion, and even admiration. It wasn't just the case she had won, it was the way she had done it. She wasn't supposed to be there, not in their minds. A young woman, a former defendant, challenging a seasoned prosecutor and a well-established legal system? It was almost impossible to believe. Yet, she had done it. Outside the courtroom, a reporter rushed up to her, a microphone in hand. "Ms. Carter, can you explain how you managed to pull this off?" the reporter asked, the excitement in his voice barely contained. Emily paused, her steps slowing as she turned to face him. She had expected this moment. After all, this was the world she had just broken into, a world of reporters, cameras, and endless questions. But today, she wasn't going to give the standard line. Today, she was going to speak her truth. "There's no secret," Emily said, her voice clear and firm. "The truth was always there. I just had to make sure it was heard. I wasn't just defending myself today. I was defending something bigger, the idea that the law is meant to serve everyone, not just those who fit a certain mold." Her gaze shifted to the camera, her eyes unwavering. "People like me, young, underestimated, we're capable of so much more than the world gives us credit for." The reporter was silent for a moment, clearly taken aback by the sincerity in her voice. The crowd around them grew quieter as they took in her words. It wasn't just the legal victory that had impressed them, it was the power behind her message, the way she had challenged the very systems that had once tried to silence her. As she walked away from the media frenzy, Emily's mind raced. She had won, yes, but the fight was far from over. There would always be people who underestimated her. There would always be those who tried to diminish her achievements because of her age, her gender, or the color of her skin. But Emily had shown them something today. Greatness wasn't defined by appearances. It was defined by what you did with the power you had. Back in the courtroom, Judge Hawkins sat silently, the weight of his decision settling in. He had misjudged Emily, and he knew it. But he wasn't the only one. The whole legal system, perhaps even the entire room, had underestimated her. And in the end, it was Emily Carter, with her quiet strength and sharp mind, who had rewritten the rules of the game. As the courthouse doors closed behind her, Emily stepped out into the sunlight. It felt like a new day, a new beginning. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She was just getting started. The world had watched her win, but now, she would make sure they never forgot her name. The courtroom was still. The murmurs had died down, and all eyes were fixed on Judge Hawkins as he sat motionless, reflecting on the unprecedented turn of events. Emily Carter, standing in front of him, had done what no one had expected. She had not only fought back, but she had also exposed the flaws in the prosecution's case with undeniable precision. The judge could feel the weight of the decision in his hands as he prepared to speak. "Ms. Carter," he began slowly, his voice carrying the gravitas of the moment, "you've presented a compelling argument. The evidence, the inconsistencies, the legal violations, they cannot be ignored." He paused, looking at the prosecution, who had once seemed so confident. "And I must admit, you've shown us all a side of justice we weren't ready for." West, the prosecutor, opened his mouth to protest, but the judge held up a hand. "Mr. West," he said, his voice hardening, "this case was built on shaky ground from the start. And now, due to the errors in procedure and evidence, I have no choice but to dismiss all charges." A silence fell over the room. Emily didn't react, but inside her heart soared. She had done it. The system had tried to break her, but she had risen above it. The judge banged his gavel, and the words rang out, "Case dismissed." The gallery exploded, some in disbelief, others in admiration. Emily had won, and the victory wasn't just hers. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been underestimated. The courtroom drama of Emily Carter offers a powerful lesson in resilience and the pursuit of justice. At the start, no one expected a young woman, especially one from a background so often underestimated, to stand up to the weight of a flawed system. But Emily did more than just defend herself. She tore down the assumptions made about her based on her age, gender, and race. She showed us all that intelligence, integrity, and determination can break through even the most rigid barriers. The lesson here is clear. Never underestimate the power of someone who refuses to be defined by others' expectations. Emily's victory wasn't just about winning a legal case. It was about challenging the very systems that often work against those who are marginalized. She didn't wait for permission. She seized the opportunity to prove that justice is not about appearances. It's about truth. In a world that often favors the powerful and the established, Emily's story reminds us that anyone, no matter their background or how others see them, has the ability to fight for what's right. It's not about being given a chance. It's about taking it and proving that even the most unlikely people can change the course of history. What do you think about Emily's incredible journey in challenging the system and proving that anyone can fight for justice, no matter their background? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe in the power of resilience and the importance of standing up for what's right, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring stories and valuable insights. Let's continue the conversation and learn together.